Morning, everyone. Welcome to this community webinar on the proposed Northwest transmission developments. My name is Nicola Wass. I'm a community engagement practitioner and facilitator from consultancy RPS, and I'm really pleased to be here with you this morning. I'm joined by Damien Vermi from TAS Networks. He's the project director for the Northwest transmission component of Project Marinus. He has over 25 years experience in the electrical industry in Tasmania, across Australia and internationally. And also with us this morning is Barton Napier. Barton is the Senior Environmental and Social Principal for consultancy Tetra Tech Coffee. That's an international consultancy firm, and Barton has over 15 years experience in the Victorian electricity industry and 20 years experience in environmental and social impact assessments on major infrastructure and energy projects throughout Australia and internationally. Barton's led the route and site option studies for over 5,000 kilometres of linear infrastructure, including Basslink, other electrical transmission projects and high pressure gas pipelines in Australia and in Southeast Asia. So welcome, Barton and Damien. Thank you so much for joining us. Our process for today is fairly straightforward. After these very short introduction and a little bit of Zoom housekeeping, I'm going to hand over to Damien, who'll be delivering an acknowledgement of country and then sharing a bit of a project overview and update. We'll then hear from Barton, who will talk through the proposed route options and the reasoning for those before we go into a Q&A session, which we're planning and hoping it'll be about 15 to 20 minutes. And then we'll close with just some next steps and opportunities there are for you and others in the community to provide feedback about the proposed transmission developments. We're on Zoom, and as this is a webinar and we're recording the webinar, you'll notice that your camera and microphone options are muted and not functioning, but we are still really keen to hear your questions so that we can answer them. So we'll be utilising the Q&A function that you have through the Zoom platform. So you just need to click on to the QA icon to post your questions. Also recommend that you just keep an eye on the questions that other participants are raising. And if you see a question that you are going to raise yourself or that you're interested in getting the answer to, if you use the like function, we'll be prioritising the questions based on the number of participants who are interested in hearing responses. We aim to get through all the questions, but if we can't, we'll be able to answer the remaining questions offline. But we do aim to prioritise the most important questions to you. So post the questions throughout the presentations, like any questions that you're also interested in seeing the answers to. So I think that's it for all the introduction and how today's session is going to work. So I'm now going to hand over to Damien to talk through project overview and current status. Over to you, Damien.
Thank you, Nicola. I'll just move to the next screen. Okay, so TAS Networks acknowledges the Palawa as the original owners and custodians of Lutruwita. TAS Networks acknowledges the Palawa have maintained their spiritual and cultural connection to the land and water. We pay respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. So TAS Networks, so who we are. TAS Networks is government owned and we operate and maintain the electricity transmission and distribution network in Tasmania. We operate in the national electricity market and customers nominate to connect to our network, and we work with these customers with loads or generators and provide connection solutions for them. TAS Networks invests in the network to support capacity growth. However, these investments must be economic and pass regulatory tests. And Marinus Link and Northwest transmission developments are such investments that need to pass these tests. So the energy sector is in transition, and Australia is expecting a retirement of coal-fired generators. And to replace this, new renewable generation is required. And this is led by wind and solar. And also dispatchable hydro and pump storage is also needed to support this. We can see the figures, looking at 19,000 megawatts of coal-fired expected to retire by 2040. So the balance is we need some significant figures to be able to replace this. And this is where Marinus Link can come into the fore to be an option to be able to help in this transition. So in order to connect Marinus Link, the Northwest transmission developments are needed. These proposed developments include upgrades to existing lines and development of new transmission corridors and infrastructure. The developments include 220 kilometres of new and upgraded transmission lines and infrastructure that will power up investment in the Northwest. Previously, we've gone out with the Staverton to Hampshire Hills line. That's the yellow line that you can see on the diagram there. But today we're focusing on the remaining transmission network, so all of the remaining associated with that. And Barton will get into further detail about that. So we estimate that the Northwest transmission developments alone will provide up to $1.4 billion worth of economic stimulus to Tasmania, with 1,400 jobs during construction. So it's a really key enabler to bring that benefit to the state. And this is the timeline of where we are at the moment. So we're in the design and approval stage of the project right here, right now. We've just released the route options report, and our community consultation activities are ramping up to raise that awareness and seek the feedback from the community about our proposals. We're aiming to have approvals and make a final investment decision for the whole of the Marinus Link and also the Northwest Transmission by the end of 2023, and with construction starting post that in 2024 if we get those final investment decisions approved. So this is really the start of consultation for the Northwest Transmission developments. And I will now pass to Barton, who will provide that reasoning on the route options of what we progressed.
Thank you very much, Damien. And welcome everybody. What I'd like to do now is take you through the proposed route options and the reasoning why they were chosen and the background to how we established that they were the prudent and feasible alternatives for what we call the remaining Northwest transmission developments. As with all route selection, the shortest distance between connections points is preferred. And the reason is that that has a direct bearing on cost. But obviously in the real world, that's not possible. And prudent and feasible routes are informed by constraints and opportunities. The constraints comprise the technical specification, what will be built. And the reason that's an important consideration is some linear infrastructure, indeed most linear infrastructure, is constrained in some form or other as to where it can be built and how it can be built. So an understanding of that is very important. The next most important input to understanding the constraints that we need to address through either route selection or manage through construction methods and operation and maintenance procedures are the environmental and social constraints. And they are what are the values that exist in the area of interest, in this case, Northwest Tasmania, and they comprise a range of issues, including biodiversity, cultural heritage, land use, statutory planning, geology, soils, landforms, hydrology, rivers and streams, etc. And they are all important inputs to defining the constraints. What we also seek when we pursue route selection is opportunities to utilise existing corridors or to co-locate with existing infrastructure. And the existing electricity transmission network in Northwest Tasmania provides key opportunities for this project. So what will be built? TAS Networks proposes to build double circuit 220 kV overhead transmission lines like you see in the diagram there. The towers will have an average height of 44 metres, some higher, some lower, depending on the topography. In some instances, a new 90-metre wide strategic easement will be acquired to secure a corridor allowing for future flexibility and future capacity in greenfield areas. As you'll see in the coming slides, the existing easements propose a unique opportunity to co-locate a lot of this infrastructure. A 220 kV overhead transmission line requires a 60-metre wide operational area. And as I've said, it's mostly accommodated within the existing easements, but we do in a number of instances require some widening of those easements. The other important piece of infrastructure are access tracks, which are required to get to the tower sites, to build them and to maintain them throughout their operating life. I'll now take you through each of the sections that Damien outlined in the previous slide and talk about how the route was determined in each of those sections and where the new infrastructure is to be located. The first section is Palmerston to Sheffield. And in that section, we need to duplicate the existing single circuit 220 kV transmission line, which you see in the right there. We need to build a new double circuit transmission line parallel to that line to reinforce that part of the Northwest Tasmania transmission network. The existing transmission line is in an 80-metre wide easement or right-of-way. And as you can see in the diagram, we'll be able to accommodate the new transmission line within that right-of-way or easement, but will require widening of the existing easement by 20 metres to provide the required electrical safety clearances. So in the diagram, the image here you see is the existing line. The new line will be built here next door to this line. It's being built on the northeast side of the existing line, and that followed an assessment of the constraints along the transmission line route. And that work concluded that being on the northeast or northern side of that transmission line was less constrained than being on the western side or southwestern side. And the reasons that drove that decision were impacts on or constraints imposed by centre pivot irrigators, by existing buildings, by existing farm infrastructure, by proximity to some environmentally sensitive areas. And so when considered overall, the decision was made that the least constrained option was to locate it on the northeast side of that transmission line. The next section is Sheffield through to the Stowport area, just east of Burnie. And in this section, there are existing transmission lines, two existing transmission lines, an existing 220 kV and a double circuit 110 kV line, as you can see in the image on the right. This is a very wide easement in places. It varies in width depending on how close those two transmission lines are together. And so again, it creates an opportunity to co-locate the new infrastructure with the existing infrastructure. In this case, we will be able to retire the existing 220 kV single circuit transmission line that you see in the image here, and replace it with the new double circuit transmission line. The reason we're building on this side of the transmission line is to provide strategic opportunity for future network expansion or for replacing this infrastructure in the future if required. And so by building 10 metres to this side of the existing line will enable us to then take this line out of service and remove it, but also leave space for a future transmission line if ever required within the existing easement. In some places, constraints imposed by land use, by biodiversity assets and values, and by the topography necessitate this line, the new line, being built exactly in place of the existing line. And that will necessitate a staged removal of this line. We then move to the Stowport area, which is this area you can see here, just southeast of Burnie, which is just visible in the top of the image here. And it's at this point that we need to make a connection from the existing and new infrastructure here down to Heybridge here, which is the proposed landfall and converter station site for Marinus Link. So Marinus Link is proposed to connect to the Tasmanian transmission network through Heybridge into this area here. In looking at how that connection might be made, we investigated 3 possible routes. As you can see there, an eastern route in purple, a central route in yellow, and a western route in orange. The area, as you might appreciate from the information presented in this diagram, is highly constrained by biodiversity values, being the Blythe River Conservation Area, a conservation covenant here, the Chasm Creek Conservation Area, by threatened species records here being wedge-tailed eagle and grey goshawk nest sites, the geology in this area, and settlement being houses here at Heybridge, and general rural community around Stowport. So when we looked at all these issues in detail, the route up along the valley is coming up along here, through the valley, over the existing landfill, past the existing disposal sites for the former dioxide plant, was the least constrained. As you can appreciate from these rings here, these circles, which are 1,000 metre radius from the eagles' nests, this route here provides the greatest separation to eagles, the greatest separation to the biodiversity assets protected by these reserves, and it also provides the most visual mitigation in terms of running up the valley. It keeps it well below this rural residential development up on top of the plateau here, and also removes it from coming over the ridge, which this option did, which would be highly visible to Heybridge. So by being lower in the landscape, it does have some benefits from that. It also enables us to connect into the existing lines away from existing houses, which is an added advantage. So that is why this route here has come forward as the least constrained and the proposed route for making that connection from the Tasmanian network to Marinus Link at Heybridge Converter Station site. Just to visualise what that will look like, in this instance, we will have the new transmission line from Sheffield through to Stowport, moving on down to, or continuing on down to Heybridge, which is this line. And then we need another line coming out of Heybridge back to the Stowport area, which will then go on to Burnie. And so in this instance, there'll be 2 new transmission lines in a 90 metre wide easement at those separations. This image here shows you the point at which the new lines will connect into the existing line. This is the existing 220 kV here and the existing 110. This is looking back to Mount Montgomery there. And so the new lines will connect in the vicinity of this tower here. As you can see, there's settlement on Minna Road back there, and then behind, out of view of this image, is settlement around Maydena Road. And so the new line will come down through this side valley here, side gully, into the existing line in this vicinity here. As we move from Stowport area into Burnie to connect into the Burnie substation, we're highly constrained by the existing settlement there, by the suburbs of Burnie, which have been built up to, and some land use like gardens have been allowed under the transmission lines. And so in this instance, it's not possible to build next to the existing infrastructure. And so the existing transmission line, as you see here in the image, will be removed and replaced by the new transmission line within the existing corridor that's already preserved there. One of the opportunities that this presents is that some of these towers are in the backyards, as you can see in this instance. Because these towers are higher as necessary for the higher capacity or loads that they can carry in terms of electricity transfer or power transfer, there will be opportunity to move some of these towers around to reduce the impacts on some of these residents. We then need to get from Burnie substation here through to Hampshire Hills, which is where the Staverton to Hampshire Hills transmission line that Damien referred to earlier terminates. And there's two options that were looked at here. The first was the existing Burnie Waratah 110 kV line down here, which continues on through here down to Savage River and Waratah, or a new route. The reason that this line was ruled out, particularly in this section, was, as it says there, it's very highly constrained by settlement. It has houses up against it on both sides in places, and to be able to follow that corridor through there would necessitate crossing backwards and forwards across that transmission line, potentially moving it to one side in one section, as you can see here, to make space for the new transmission line. It cannot be taken out of service because it's carrying the support load to the west coast, and it's a critical part of the network. And so that combination of factors necessitated us looking at another alternative to get from the Burnie area down to Hampshire Hills. That was partially informed by the fact that Marinus Link was considering two landfalls, Heybridge and East Cam, just up here, or Cam River Heads. And so it became prudent to consider, well, could we identify a converter station site that would service either of these Marinus Link options? And that was the East Cam area here, where it was feasible converter stations, switching station site was identified, and hence it then became prudent to consider a route to that site and then south from that site to Hampshire Hills. And hence this route here that you see. So this route involves following the existing 110 kV line west from Burnie on the south side into the East Cam area, and then running down this production forestry concession right through into about here, then through a patchwork of plantations and farmland through to here at the point where it joins, and then follows the existing 110 line south to Hampshire Hills through plantations. This route here, as I said, has more biodiversity issues than this route, obviously through farmland, less land use impacts, but it's notable that the biodiversity values in here are in pockets, which we have made every attempt to avoid in this, and that this tracks through largely the areas that have been harvested for saw logs and pulp, and follows existing access tracks and plantation tracks as much as possible through there to reduce those impacts. Just to visualise what that looks like, this is just west of Burnie, looking to the west towards East Cam area, which is near that hill there. This is the existing 110 kV line, and as the diagram shows here, the new line will be built here 30 metres offset this line in this instance, within the existing easement, but it will require widening of the easement as was required for the Palmerston Sheffield line. As we move south from the East Cam area to the Highclere area, which is where the line joins the Burnie Waratah line, you can see that we'll be seeking, or TAS Networks will be seeking, a 90 metre wide easement to preserve the option of additional capacity if ever required in the future in this slot here. And so initially only the 60 metre wide easement will be 60 metre wide operational area required for this transmission line will be cleared, with this section only cleared if this was ever developed in the future. Once we join the existing Burnie Waratah 110 kV line, the new transmission line again will be built on a 30 metre offset with an allowance for a future line if ever required. And collectively that will involve initially widening the existing easement, which is 50 metres or 25 metres either side of this line, by 35 metres and ultimately up to 65 metres. This proposal is focused on just this 30 metres here, or 30 metres wide widening of the existing easement. We then move to the missing link, or the section from Staverton to Sheffield, with the section Staverton to Hampshire Hills addressed in that project. And in this section, there are 3 existing transmission lines, as you can see here. And they exist in an easement, which is nominally 120 metres wide. It varies slightly in a couple of sections where these lines move around topographic features. The intention in this section is to upgrade these lines. So it does not involve the building of new towers, as in a new line, or widening of the easement. The easement's wide enough to accommodate the upgrade to these lines. And with that, I'll hand over to Nicola to invite questions.
Thanks, Barton. And hi again, Damien. Thanks both for those presentations, and clearly there's lots of information there. They're quite dense with details. So if you've got any questions, please post them in the Q&A through the Q&A function, and we'll pose them. This webinar is part of an ongoing engagement that we've had with community and stakeholders over the last few weeks. And through the sessions we've already had, a number of questions have been raised. And I just want to start by posing some of those to you, Damien, and to Barton, to tease out some of the things that we know have come up from previous community members. So I just want to start, Damien, in terms of what the current status is. So, you know, is it guaranteed the project's going ahead? Is there overarching approval for the project?
No, it's not guaranteed it's going ahead. We're certainly putting a strong business case and developing up the approvals, but the whole intention that we're hoping to get all of our approvals and making a final investment decision, which will be based on the approvals, based on the costings, the whole economic analysis, by the end of 2023. So you know, we're midway through there to get to that. For the approval side, we've got a lot of work to do with you know, getting on the ground and actually talking with the landowners, getting access to their properties. So that's what, you know, part of this process, to go and understand that, so we can get access, so we can do the ecology surveys, cultural heritage, you know, geotech surveys. I think Barton mentioned some of these as well. So this is the intention, to get that, so we can get some more information to put that up for our approval process, which would have to go through, which is quite a significant project. But no, so it's definitely not approved as yet. So as I said, the main thing, we're looking to get that approvals by the end of 2023.
Okay, thanks, Damien. And I know you started talking about touching on some of the approval processes, but did you just want to talk a little bit about what the environmental and planning approvals are required and what they will sort of involve?
Certainly, Nicola. So the overall project, which is called the Northwest Transmission Developments, has been declared a major project under the Major Infrastructure Development Act. And as a consequence of that, it requires approval under that Act, which will be overseen by the Tasmanian Planning Commission. And that process is underway now and about to start for this component. That also will require the project to address environment protection and biodiversity conservation matters where they are triggered. And they are triggered potentially in the areas of native vegetation around Mount Montgomery, notwithstanding the existing easements there, but also in the new section from the East Cam area through to Hampshire Hills. So the project will require environmental and planning approvals under MIDA and under the EPBC Act.
Okay, thanks, Barton. So in terms of those environmental impacts you were talking about, can you give some ideas, and I think actually probably this is a question to you, Damien, about how those impacts could be managed? We know there's a fair bit of concern has come up already in terms of eagles, which Barton mentioned, nesting sites. Can you just share a little bit of information about how environmental impacts can be managed?
Yeah, look, it's certainly a key consideration, and will be assessed on that. So certainly with the eagles, more recently we have done helicopter surveys around the area. So Barton highlighted on one of his maps there was various raptor sites, some nests that we've picked up, but we've done further surveys to understand, well, are there any other ones that are there as well? So we have conducted that, and we're just awaiting the report back, because that's certainly a key component about how we assess our options to making sure that we're not impacting on those nests. Once again, it's working with landowners and understanding how they operate their land and how what impacts we would potentially involve with them. So by talking with them and understanding their operations, then we can actually potentially work out together that what's the best solutions in designing our lines and where our tower locations are placed. So a lot of inputs are being assessed on that. As you said, going through various technical reports. So engage consultants. Coffee is obviously one of them, but certainly further consultants to do those on-ground surveys to understand the impacts of where we're going through those areas to get feedback and to feed that into our assessments. So to making sure that we have got the best route that is balancing out all of those environmental considerations as well as in that design sense as well.
And so one of the things that has come up, one of the questions that come up, given that there will be will be impacts from that from the lines on both the environment and landowners, is the question about why the transmission lines can't be installed underground. Is that an option you considered, and why isn't that part of the proposal?
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. It's certainly a question that does come up, especially when you've got Marinus. I suppose Marinus Link is an HVDC, so high voltage direct current, whereas the transmission assets that we have in Tasmania are AC, alternating current. Marinus Link is connecting two significant load points, one in Burnie and then one in Victoria. So that because you're having a converter station at each site, but in Burnie and also in Victoria, that's where you can have a direct current through there. So that direct current, that cable is going underwater and then it's going underground. So it's connecting two load points. Within Tasmania, we have the alternating current network, so the AC overhead network. What we've tried to do is utilise existing easements. So putting the assets in already their easements, widening some of them, once again, as Barton had mentioned, and in some areas we just can't. So we have to put it through new greenfield areas. The overhead component, undergrounding can, it certainly takes away that visual aspect, but generally for AC networks, it's only used for short distances, not for long distances that we're looking at. And we're looking at over 220 kilometres worth of transmission lines that need to be redeveloped and developed. The undergrounding also is an initial impact. You do have to do a lot of digging up the ground. It's you don't have the capacity through undergrounding, so you have to widen. It's actually wider than our existing easements, so there is an impact there. You do have to have some substations in between because of the capacitance discharge. So you have to keep the volts up as such. So there is impacts in there. So you'd have mini substations every, ranging from up to 20 kilometres along to keep that in. So it still is an impact. I suppose the advantage of also overhead compared to underground is that underground, if you have a fault or something, very significant to dig up and to find those faults. And so you have a longer outages compared to overhead where you can maintain them certainly easier. And also just for connecting in new assets, new connections such as a generator or a load is certainly much easier to connect to the existing AC network rather than an underground or into that DC network. And also the terrain around the area, and that's why we're doing geotech assessments. We've noticed it's quite difficult terrain to actually underground, so the expense and the costing associated would be quite significant, and it wouldn't be I suppose that feasibility would push that feasibility into question.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Damien. So lots of considerations go into each of the decisions.
Absolutely.
So you did mention the link to Marinus Link. Could you just expand a little bit on how this range of developments relate to other proposed projects, and either proposed or ones that have approval, such as the Robben Islands Wind Farm, the Cattle Hill Wind Farm Battery of the Nation, and Jim's Plain? Yeah,
we see that overall Marinus Link and the Northwest Transmission developments, that's it's that opportunity to open up for further development in Tasmania to enable more renewable developments. We see that, as I said, as a transmission company, we connect in new generators and loads. So Robben's Island and Cattle Hill, they are generators that want to connect to our network. So we look at the most efficient way for connecting them in. But we see that as Marinus is providing that opportunity for further generators to be developed in Tasmania, so they can export their capacity onto the mainland. As I said, there's the amount of coal-fired generators that are closing on the mainland and progressing over the next 20 years. There is such a need for more generation to be commit to the rest of the market. And we see that Marinus Link is an enabler to enable those transmission development, those generator developments to connect in. So that's more wind development, helps out with the battery of the nation, so that Hydro Tasmania is progressing along as well. So it's another opportunity for that export side.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Damien. Now, unless some more or any questions come through the QA platform through the Zoom meeting, I think this is going to be our last question. And I'm not sure if it's to you, Barton, or to Damien, but we're talking today about the proposed route release. Does that mean that's the final route, that you'll be going to government and saying here's what we want to do, or is it potential for that to change?
I'll start with the first part, and then Damien might like to follow up. So the proposed route is the conceptualisation of the project on the basis of the information we have available to us today. And so that information comprises desktop studies, some ground truthing, because we're next to TAS Networks' existing transmission lines, the benefit of all their experience and knowledge of those transmission lines and how they've performed and what the issues are that they've dealt with along those transmission lines, and the available information in terms of landowner requirements, landowner concerns from the history of working with those transmission lines and under and around them. And so we have a fairly substantial body of information, but as Damien indicated, we need to do geotechnical investigations, we need to do flora and fauna and cultural heritage surveys and a range of other surveys to fully inform that the route is in the right position. And so until such time as that information's through, the route won't be finalised.
Yes, and I suppose this is that opportunity that going on again, Barton, that we want to engage with the community. We want to get on getting access to the landowners, to their properties, so we can actually talk with them to understand, well, have we got our proposed locations, are they the best spot for us and them? So it's an iterative process, I suppose, of working through with all of those inputs to try and come out with a final preferred route. So it's the start of that process, continuing again, and we'll continue to work through with landowners. That's why we encourage people to come along to our sessions and provide that input, and we certainly want to take those inputs on and feed them into our process so we can go through that more detailed design.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, thanks, Damien. Thanks, Barton. We're just going to share the screen again, and so we can talk about next steps. So TAS Networks is committed to engaging with landowners and the communities Damien just spoke to throughout the development of the project to understand needs, concerns, so that they can be addressed wherever possible. It'll have an ongoing desire to seek landowner and community input to inform those final design decisions, and also the construction considerations to help manage and reduce impacts as much as possible. And the engagement that's happening on this project will be ongoing, and there'll be several opportunities for yourselves and other members of the community to provide feedback and comments into the proposals, and also into the environmental, land use planning and cultural heritage approval processes, some of which we've spoken about today. So as part of that ongoing opportunity to provide feedback, there are some more community information sessions coming up this week. So there's 3 sessions planned in the Burnie area. So on Thursday evening, there's a 3-hour session at the Cradle Coast Future Energy Hub in Burnie. There's a 4-hour session in Shorewell Park on Saturday, and then on this coming Sunday there's another 4-hour session in Upper Burnie at the Memorial Hall. So if you're in that local area, or you know others in that area who will be interested in finding out more, speaking to the project team, asking questions, and or raising some concerns or interests that you think the project team needs to know to take into account in that development that they're currently undertaking, please pass on the information. We'll be really, really keen to see you there. That's not the only opportunity though. There's also more opportunity to find out more and to give feedback. So once we close the webinar today, we'll email all participants with a link to a short survey that you can share your thoughts about the project and the proposed route based on the conversations and the material we've had today. You can also get information through the project website at talkwith.tasnetworks.com.au. There's a project email address if you want to raise questions or share any information. There's also a telephone number that you can use, and you can provide feedback through an interactive map, so you can give really specific site location information that's important for the team to know. So that's where you can get further information. This webinar will be shared through Talk with TAS Networks by the beginning of next week. So if you know of anyone who you think will be interested in finding out about the project but couldn't make today's session or those coming up over the weekend, please let them know. In the meantime, though, thank you so much for giving up almost an hour of your time to be with us today and to hear the details about the Northwest Transmission Development Project. We'll forward the survey to you shortly, and we'll be really happy to get any feedback you'd like to give to us in relation to this proposal. And on that note, we'll close the webinar. Thanks again for your time. Bye-bye.